Good morning. Good morning to our panelists, our participants, and our viewing audience. My name is Noelle Nichols, and I'll be your host for the Ministry of Finance's Building Business webinar series. Over the next 2 days, you will hear from technical experts involved in various fiscal reform and small business development initiatives in the ministry, its agencies, and supporting ecosystem. Many of these initiatives aim to make the government work smarter, faster, and better. Today is all about fiscal reform, with a focus on public financial management and public procurement. In other words, we're talking about managing taxpayer money and government contracts. Specifically, how the new laws enacted earlier this year transform how the government manages public funds and goes about spending taxpayer funds to procure goods and services. Tomorrow, we will focus on opportunities for small business development. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speakers, Gaynell Roll, Undersecretary in the Financial Secretary's Office at the Ministry of Finance, and Crystal Rutherford Ferguson, Chairman of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation. Both will bring introductory remarks.
Good morning, and welcome to the Ministry of Finance Building Business webinar series. I bring greetings on behalf of the Minister of State for Finance, Senator the Honorable Kwesi Thompson, who will be joining us to open the program tomorrow morning. Acting Financial Secretary Malin Johnson, and the entire team here at the Ministry of Finance. Over the course of the next 2 days, you will have the opportunity to hear from technical experts in the ministry and its partner organization in pursuit of 3 objectives. First, this seminar and training is designed to raise awareness and understanding of the recently enacted fiscal reform legislation that is currently being implemented across the public service. The new laws will result in sweeping changes to the way the government does business and consequently transform how it facilitates the business sector. Next, we will share information about the opportunities available in government to support private sector business development, with an emphasis on the services available through the Access Accelerator Small Business Development Center, commonly called SBDC, and the Revenue Department of the Ministry of Finance. Lastly, we want to ensure that business community and the wider public is exposed to and trained in the use of 3 new software applications currently in use here at the Ministry of Finance as part of the government's digital transformation and modernization initiative. We are happy to partner with the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation to bring members of the business community here today for this purpose. We know that the business community has a unique interest in how the Ministry of Finance and its agencies operate, given the direct impact that our operations have on your businesses. I thank Madam Chair, Ms. Crystal Rutherford Ferguson, for collaborating with us to bring your members and the wider public here today. Earlier this year, during the budget exercise for fiscal year 2021-2022, the government passed 4 significant pieces of legislation: the Public Financial Management Act, the Public Debt Management Act and the Statistics Act, which took effect on July 1, and the Procurement Public Act, which will take effect on September 1. Each act, according to policy mandate established by the government, aims to raise the standard of existing government processes to meet global best practices with a focus on transparency and accountability. Legal reform is not the most exciting of relatable topics, but it is important. It influences the quality and standards of operation and dictates what public officers are permitted and obligated to do. If the law is not followed, there are clear consequences that cannot be avoided. Legal reform is often a necessary first step to deliver sweeping changes in government. With these new laws, the public service has new matching orders, and it is important for public officers to know what that means and for the general public alike. The Ministry of Finance has established a transition team to support the implementation of the new legislation and the adoption of the rules and regulations across government. The acts are being implemented by civil servants who are passionate about improving government and serving the Bahamian people. Civil servants who are committed to doing the right things and ensuring a universally high standard across government. I want to emphasize, this is an undertaking of enormous proportion, and it is a process. There is no switch we can flip to magically implement a new law. As business owners and managers yourselves, you would be very familiar with change management process. They can be slow and uneven at times. However, as members of the transition team, we are committed to success. Our internal training and public education activities will be ongoing, as will be the phased implementation. I want to conclude by thanking the Chamber and all participants for joining us here today. I hope you will find our presentations informative and the discussions fruitful. I remind you to stay safe and continue to follow all the safety health protocols as together we conquer this pandemic. Thank you and enjoy.
Government officials, BCCAC directors, members and staff, and all the participants joining us for this session. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I've been asked to welcome you and to give you an overview on the Boosting Your Business webinar series, which I am delighted to do. The Chamber is constantly looking for ways to bring relevant information to our members and by extension, the broader business community. As a result, we are here today to benefit from presentations regarding the changes on the way with public procurement, the new ecosystem for small business growth, and public financial management. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first of a two-day series that will also address government concessions that can be used to boost your business, together with 3 training sessions on the e-procurement and suppliers registry, Atlas portal, and the My Gateway portal. The business community through the Chamber have made a clarion call to successive governments to utilize technology to the benefit of end users and to improve the ease of doing business and government efficiencies. We are pleased to see so many government services being made available online, and we encourage the continued expansion of digital government services. However, we acknowledge that the use of technology will come with a learning curve. It is our hope, and one we anticipate will be flattened through sessions like these. The Chamber of Commerce is supporting businesses in a depressed economy. This is evident through the various comments and feedbacks received by our members. Business environments all over the world have been challenged in this recovery due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As the Chamber, We will continue to host webinars which highlight opportunities and inform our members, and by extension, the broader business community, on ways they may be able to recover, sustain, and even grow their businesses in the future, among other things. Further, we encourage all participants to ready themselves for the full rebound of our economy by taking advantage of the information which will be revealed in the presentations from our expert speakers today and tomorrow. I am pleased to mention that the Chamber of Commerce continue to build relationships and form synergies that will benefit its members in many different ways, either via its advocacy for policy reform, access to relevant information, or positioning itself to give advice to members regarding business-related issues. It is important to note that this webinar is a direct result of building such relationships, and I am certain that we will continue to find ways to assist our members with having crucial access to business-related information. In closing, I welcome you, and I wish all the participants a productive session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your keen attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roll and Ms. Rutherford Ferguson. We are going to jump right into our program with our first speaker, who will be presenting on the big changes that are on the way with the Public Procurement Act 2021. Mr. Breon Scott is a finance associate at the Ministry of Finance. He received his bachelor's in business administration with a concentration in logistics and supply chain management from the University of Central Arkansas. He is currently pursuing an MBA with a similar focus. I'd like to welcome Mr. Breon Scott, who will be presenting our first speaker.
Good morning. Introduction to the Public Procurement Act. The process of acquiring goods and services or awarding government contracts is called procurement. Starting September 1st, the procurement process for all departments, government agencies, ministries, and state-owned enterprises will be governed by this new Public Procurement Act 2021. Which will replace a section of the Financial Administrative and Audit Act 2020. Under the Public Procurement Act, we now established this new Public Procurement Department. It will be headed in the Ministry of Finance by a Chief Procurement Officer. And the focuses of this new department will be for the responsibility for the organizing of central procurement for commonly used and non-commonly used goods for all procurement entities. It will now publish new annual reports, procurement planning, to start at the beginning of each government year. And we will publish annual report each year after the end of October. The procurement plan will consist of the breakdown of goods, works, and services, the value of the procurement, etc. The draft procurement plan must be submitted by the 31st of March to the Chief Procurement Officer en route to the submission to the Financial Secretary. The final procurement plan must be submitted by the 30th of September to the Chief Procurement Officer for submission to the FS. And I'd like to take this time to let everyone know that we are also en route for searching for a Chief Procurement Officer. So you can have a look at the submission deadline, which is September 3rd, 2021. The Electronic Procurement Supplier Registry. The procurement process is now moving online to receive tender notices, request for quotes, and to even participate in this procurement process. Every government business must now be registered on the Electronic Procurement Supplier Registry, which will now be utilized by the Public Procurement Department. To date, Over 2,200 persons have been registered on the system. I must make mention that this process was optional in the beginning, but now, as of September 1st, businesses must be registered on the Procurement Supplier Registry, or they would miss out on this new process of securing government contracts. And I must mention that after September 1st, registration will be ongoing, so don't feel that you'll be left out. The system benefits of the Electronic Procurement Supplier Registry. It pushes our efforts for greater transparency, a full list of the tender opportunities that will be visible to the wider public. Accessibility allows easier access to government opportunities and contracts. And accountability, where buyer and seller activities are now tracked on the Electronic Procurement Supplier Registry portal. Transforming the tenders board. The old tenders board is now in process of being reconfigured. Every government entity will now establish their own procurement unit and tender committee. Tender committees are empowered to award procurement contracts within the present financial thresholds. The largest contracts will be managed by the new Public Procurement Board, and the new system will reduce the bottlenecks experienced under the past model. In the old model, one tenders board with 6 members was appointed in the Ministry of Finance, and under the new model, multiple tender committees with legal, technical, and commercial experts, including department and procurement unit heads and accounting officers. Each entity must establish a tender committee to award procurement contracts whose value is in excess of $50,000. The new Public Procurement Board will now compose of 8 new members, which will be the chairperson, someone who's knowledgeable in public procurement, business administration, or finance, the financial secretary, a permanent secretary from a respective ministry, 2 persons from civil society, 2 persons from the head of professions, and a public officer to act as secretary to the board. And all of this information can be found in the Public Procurement Act 2021, subsection 15 and 16 regarding the Public Procurement Board. Now, under this new Public Procurement Act, we now establish the new financial thresholds. Anywhere in between $0 and $50,000 would now be awarded by the procuring entity. Anything in excess of $50,000 to $250,000 is now awarded by the tender committee, but is subject to the approval of the minister responsible for that procuring entity. Anything in excess of $250,000 to $1.2 million is now awarded by the minister responsible for the procuring entity and is subject to recommendations by the Public Procurement Board. Anything in excess of $1.2 million is now awarded by the Cabinet of the Bahamas and is subject to the recommendations by the board and the approval of the minister responsible for that entity. Where the recommendation is sought from Cabinet may be rejected, the Cabinet may refer the matter back to the Public Procurement Board for advice or direct that a new procurement for goods, works, and services be carried out. Methods of procurement. Under the Financial, Administrative, and Audit Act, we had 2 types of tendering process, which would have been the public and the select tendering. But now under this new Public Procurement Act, we established 8 new different bidding methods, which would all fall under the umbrella of competitive bidding, international bidding, selective bidding, restricted bidding, limited bidding, request for quotations, and request for proposals. Under the competitive bidding umbrella, we now start off with the restrictive bidding method, where a small number of suppliers are available or who is capable of completing the scope of works. Bids are invited from a minimum of 3 bidders and is subject to a minimum of 20 bidding days. The selective bidding method, which can be found in subsection 32 of the Public Procurement Act, is used for high-value procurement of goods, works, and services. It now involves a pre-qualification stage and is subject to a minimum of 30 bidding days. International bidding method, which can be found in subsection 32 of the Public Procurement Act, is where the proposed procurement contract is higher than the proposed thresholds. Specifications must be based on international standards. Notices must be published. Invitation and documents must be in English, and bids are expressed in Bahamian dollars. This now consists of a period of 40 minimum bidding days. The limited bidding method is used where there is no appropriate bids have been submitted or used in the case of an extreme emergency or urgency. Quotations must be submitted by at least one bidder and is subject to a minimum of 30 bidding days. Request for quotations. Where the procurement is for readily available goods and its total value should not exceed $5,000 for goods and services and $10,000 for works. Quotations is needed from 3 bidders to proceed forward. Request for proposals. This can be found in subsection 36 of the Public Procurement Act. Used for complex projects, often requiring a number of 3 to 6 subcontractors. Where the estimated value exceeds $1 million, it must be posted on the electronic procurement supplier registry and 2 or more local newspapers for wide circulation. The tender committee now advise the unit on the cost of procurement. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for that overview of the Public Procurement Act. We are going to open the floor for questions. We have a technical team that consists of Ms. Gaynell Roll, who would have been introduced earlier, Brian, as well as Carl Oliver, who is the Deputy Director of Economics in the Ministry of Finance. And before we open the floor for questions about public procurement, just a reminder of some of the key points from Brian's overview. The key thing right now is the September 1st date, and that date is when this act takes effect, which means the public service will now be using the online portal to manage all of its procurement. So we encourage businesses, if you have not registered on the Supplier's registry as yet, we encourage you to do so before September 1 so you don't miss out on any of those notifications that will now be coming straight from the online system. As Brian said, the registration is ongoing, so you can register at any time. However, after September 1st, if you're not registered already, you may miss out on notifications of bids and tenders that are being issued or requests for proposals that are now coming through the platform. The second reminder is about the September 3rd deadline for applying for the Chief Procurement Officer position. This is the person who's going to be responsible for heading up and managing the new department and bringing all of the new regulations into being and managing all of the different procurement units across the different governments and the tender committees. So please, if you have the qualifications, you can go to the government's website, the Ministry of Finance's resource page on its Facebook page to look for the full job description, and that is the September 3rd deadline. And the last key point to highlight from Brian's presentation is understanding how the bidding process is now being structured and expanded to allow for competitive bidding options as well as other forms of procurement now regulated by the parameters set out in the new law, including the financial thresholds. So I'm going to open up the floor now for questions. And as I indicated, we have Ms. Roll, Mr. Carl Oliver, and Brian Scott, who will all be available in order to take your questions. So the first question coming forward is there a code of practice established for project management and procurement? Is there a code of practice? Breon, you are on mute. If you could unmute yourself, please.
When we talk about the code of ethics, right now we're in the process of establishing our draft regulations where we would outline different specifications for those involved in public procurement and those moving forward with participating in procurement, making sure that we're being transparent and given the proper accountability in result of posting notices in regards of being able to let the general public know exactly what is going on and being transparent through the whole process. Right now, the electronic procurement supplier registry makes access for you to be very vital in the transparency aspect, where we go in and we be able to see exactly what's happening, who was able to post notices, who was able to answer questions, who was able to, the messaging result, everything now happens through this electronic procurement supplier registry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Breon. We have another question about a public access to information. We're not able to specifically cover that under this scope. The government does have a freedom of information legislation that it's implementing, but within the scope of this fiscal reform, the Public Access to Information Act is not included. So we have another question about the Act indicates that government entities have their own existing portals and procurement guidelines, and that these can be approved. They can have these approved by the procurement board. So the question is, when will this process for approval be provided? And if Mr. Oliver or Breon, if you can take that question.
Mr. Oliver will take the question. Thanks so much.
Excuse me, Noel?
Hi, yes, Carl, we can hear you.
Can you repeat the question again? Because I was trying to get my video on. I'm not sure my video is on.
Yes, we can see you.
So can you repeat the question I was trying to find?
No problem. The person stated that the Act allows for government entities that have their own existing portals and guidelines to have these approved by the procurement board. So the question is, when will the process for this approval be provided?
That's a good question that was raised, And the approval has already been granted to all of the agencies that have registered in the system. For example, the Ministry of Public Works, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education. And yes, the approval is ongoing. And whenever one of the agencies, request registration in the system, it's approved right away. So there's no holding back on that. And it takes no more than, 20 minutes or even less. It's an ongoing process. And we're hopeful and hoping that come September 1st, all of the government agencies will be registered on the system. And not just the public entities, also the quasi-government entities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Oliver. Another question about the implementation. What has been done or is being doing to ensure that the government and the various agencies are ready to implement and to operate under the new guidelines? What are some of the things being done and still left to be done? Ms. Rowell?
Thank you so much for the question, Ms. Nichols. We have and continue to operate ongoing training with internal and external stakeholders. We have engaged all of the government, various ministries and agencies in training. We have begun quite some time back, if business communities would remember, having businesses registered on the e-portal. To date, we have in excess of 2,000 registered business on the e-portal. The training for government agencies have already taken place. We continue to do training for those agencies as they implement their procedures and need special guidance and assistance to go on. That's ongoing. As I would have mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, that implementation is an ongoing process. It's a phased-in process. And so we continue to do that. But we are ready. We are ready for September 1 to get started. We believe that those persons that are interested in offering their services to the government will sign up and become vendors, registered vendors. Those who don't, we presuppose that they are not yet ready to offer their services to the government. As it relates to the government agencies, they all know. Remember, those agencies are governed, are controlled by the principal accounting officers, for the most part, permanent secretaries and directors who have all sat in various training and are readying their agencies, and they are going to comply. As of September 1, there is no further gratis period for persons not to seek to comply. Either you comply or you will not be in compliance as it relates to our government agencies. As it relates to our external stakeholders, you, the business community, we believe that when you are good and ready to offer your goods and services to the government, you will become a registered vendor. So we are ready, and the training is ongoing. Anyone desiring additional training, our help desk is readily available. It is set up to assist you and to accommodate you through your training process or any questions that you may have. Trust that answers your question. Thanks much.
Thank you very much. So just two websites that we want to make sure persons are familiar with. The first website is the one for the e-procurement and supplier registry. That is located at suppliers.gov.bs. Suppliers.gov.bs. If you go to that website, that is where you can register on the portal. That is where you will now, when you're participating in a bidding process, will upload your compliance documents, your bidding documents, your proposals, and that's where you'll get notifications of your status and all of the things that will now be managed transparently through the portal. So that website again is suppliers.gov.bs. Please, we encourage you to share the information with your fellow colleagues or other business owners to ensure that we get as many businesses as possible registered on the system. The other website that we want to make sure you're familiar with is the budget website, which is bahamasbudget.gov.bs. And at the budget website, you can go to the legislation tab and find a copy of all of the legislation that we'll be covering today, and those, the other ones that will not be the focus of our webinar series. But you can go to bahamasbudget.gov.bs and download the actual acts and to read through them so you can familiarize yourself with all of the different components of the legislation. So the next question is about how the different ministries and their procurement units will work or collaborate with the Public Procurement Department. Could you provide a bit more details about how that works? Why are the ministries now going to have their own units, and how will they coordinate with the Public Procurement Department in the Ministry of Finance?
Well, I'm going to defer this question to Mr. Oliver, who is going to be one of the key persons within the Public Procurement Department. But to suffice it to say that our position is that government accountability and transparency and the ease of doing business. As you see, we are going to pass it on to those ministries where there is no longer that bottleneck, that delay. But I'm going to ask Mr. Oliver to speak to the process in brief. Thanks.
I'll try my extreme best to be brief here. My camera's on? The video's on?
Yes, we're good. We can see you, Carl. Mr. Oliver,
Okay,
go ahead.
Yeah. And it's all subject to the Procurement Act. Now, in the government agencies, we have procurement unit, and we have the tender committee. And as Brian would have indicated earlier, their procurement activities is subject to threshold. In the procurement entity, or for example, a ministry, let's take for example the Ministry of Public Works. Any goods or services or works up to $50,000 those issues are addressed by the procurement unit. And in most instances, we expect these activities to be very small because it's up to $50,000. Any goods, services, or works in excess of $50,000, but up to a limit, I think, of up to $250,000, it goes to the tender committee. Again, the tender committee is within the ministry or the procurement entity. But the procurement unit serves in the ministry as the secretariat for the tender committee. So again, the tender committee, again, the procurement unit serves as the entry point for all goods, services, for all procurement activities, I may say. It has to go through the procurement unit. Any goods, services, or works in excess of $250,000, even though the process goes through the ministry, it ends up at the desk of the chief procurement officer, who transmits it to the secretariat, and that to the secretariat for the tender board. So the tender board awards goods, services, or works in excess of, again, $250,000 to up to $1.5 million. And the award is subject to approval from the Minister of Finance, and any goods or services or works, again, in excess of $1.2 million, the procurement board sends it to the to the cabinet for approval. So once again, like I said, all procurement activities, it starts within the entity, and obviously it ends within the entity because the approval process goes back to the entity. So,
thank you. So, thank you for that answer, Mr. Oliver.
But everything is in the act, you know. So.
Understood. So, just as a follow-up to that, though, what is the benefit? How is the business community and persons who are participating in the procurement process and the tender process, how is this new structure going to be a benefit? Is it going to reduce the time to get contracts approved? What are some of the benefits that persons will experience now under this new structure?
Well, you know, under the old system, any goods, services, or goods in excess of $50,000, it had to go to the tender board. Now that has been changed. Within the ministry now, the ministry can actually approve any goods, works, or services procurement process up to $250,000. So it's more beneficial to the vendors as opposed to having to go through the current tender board for goods, services, or works in excess of $50,000. So the limit has been reduced significantly in terms of thresholds of these procurement activities.
Mm-hmm. And the experts that sit on these committees, does that suggest that that the persons who are going to be reviewing these contracts are now going to be specialists in the areas in which the procurement is taking place? So within the tender committee in the Ministry of Works or the tender committee within the Ministry of Health, these committees these bids will now be reviewed and assessed by a bigger body of technical experts within each of these areas? Is that how the committees are structured?
That's correct. That's correct. And even if they don't have the expert, they can always go and source the expert to assist them in addressing these procurement activities.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have two questions.
Additionally, sorry.
Go ahead.
Additionally, I'm sorry, Noel, if I may add, it also opens for a wider populace, a wider business community via the e-portal system to be informed and notified of the goods and services made available. So there's more competitive nature, and straight across the board, businesses that would have complained before that they were not invited to be made a part of the process, or they did not know a good, a particular good or services was needed by a ministry. Being a registered vendor give you access to that. It gives you access that all of the notification that needs that need to be met by the ministries are placed on this portal. So it's important that businesses register to be a part of the process. No longer do you need to be sidelined. Once you are registered, you are informed, you are able to place your quote, your bid, and to be a part of a very competitive and transparent process.
Thank you very much. So we have a couple questions from Facebook, and we'll take a few more before we wind down to transition to the next presenter. The first question is there a maximum number of contracts that someone can be awarded in a certain period of time? Is there a maximum number of contracts that one vendor can be awarded in a certain period of time? Mr. Oliver?
Thank you. Well, there's no limit on the number of contracts that can be awarded to a vendor. If the vendor submits a bid with respect to a procurement activity, and if he or she is successful, then they receive the contract for that assignment. And again, as I would have indicated, and as you would have asked, on these various boards, for example, in the procurement unit and also on the tender board, and rightfully so the procurement board, they have experts. So when the vendor submits his proposal, these individuals, they examine closely all of the bids that came in, and they make a decision as to which vendor's proposal fits the description as to the procurement activity that they want to advance on. So a vendor can have as many contracts as the various boards, again, the procurement unit or the tender committee or the procurement board desires based on the proposal that was submitted. So there's no limitation.
Okay, great, thank you. So what about the process of participating in these bids? Can you provide some details about the process of participating in the bids? The question specifically refers to how long the process takes and the time frame.
And I think Brian can respond to that.
So all through the process, there is a minimum period of bidding days, which I mentioned, a minimum bidding period. So for the competitive bidding, anything that falls under that bidding period, that bidding method would be 30 bidding days. Anything under the restricted bidding method would be 20 bidding days. Anything under the selective bidding method would be 30 bidding days. And anything under the international bidding method would be a minimum of 40 bidding days. Limited bidding method would be a minimum of 30 days. And like I mentioned again, all of these periods will be a minimum. So you can expect it to last anywhere between that 30 or 40 bidding days as required by the Act.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And those details are also available online in the Act, as well as the information that we will continue to publish through the Ministry of Finance about the process. Also, just a reminder that once a business is trying to participate in a bidding process, they will be required to be tax compliant. So the Ministry of Finance always likes to encourage the business community to stay up to date with all of its obligations, so that when an opportunity arises, there's not a barrier because of tax compliance. Right now, the first and most important thing is to get registered on the system. But when it comes to actually participating in these processes, tax compliance will be a requirement. So just a reminder to stay up to date with those things. So the next question is about small businesses. The legislation, it had been said, will include provisions that set aside some funds from the government's budget for small businesses to participate in public procurement. Mr. Scott, could you just give some additional details on if that is the case and how that works?
Yes, ma'am. We're now still in process of deciding exactly which percentage will be allotted out for micro, small, medium business enterprises. So that's still in works or still under stipulations. We're looking into that.
But the
Ms.
new
Rhoda,
law
you need-
creates that provision, or how does this act, the new law actually facilitate that?
Yes, ma'am. The law does indicate that under subsection 7 of the Public Procurement Act, where it reads, I can read, to implement guidance and practices designed to support, enhance, and to measure the participation of micro, small, and medium enterprises in public procurement. But like I said, we're still in collaboration with trying allot exactly what is the percentage amount that they would like to allot to the micro, small, and medium enterprises in public procurement.
Okay, Brian, I think what you want to make mention is that power is given to the minister and how the minister does that. So we're waiting for that process as the minister sees fit and will determine that.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, your audio dropped a little bit, but if I understood correctly, as Gaynell followed up, that the new law creates that provision and gives the minister the power to dedicate a certain percentage of the procurement budget for contracts to be awarded to small businesses. And so annually, the minister is able to advise and set aside that percentage. And now across the government, consideration will have to be given to ensure that small businesses are getting equal opportunities to participate in the procurement process. So thank you very much for that. And the final question on this section is also from online. The person from Facebook, the person would like to know how soon after opening a business or getting a business license can somebody register on the portal and participate in government bids? Mr. Oliver, could you take that?
Yeah, it's a quick process. You know, as soon as the individual or the vendor decide that they want to register onto the system, and if they have any issues with registering, you know, there are numbers on the web page with respect to the vendors seeking assistance from our help desk. So as soon as they're registered, they can participate in any procurement activities. And it all depends upon the area that they're registering in. For example, if they are providing, I don't know, let's say water or landscaping. So yes, once they registered, immediately they can participate in any procurement activities.
Ms. Nichols, if I can add to Mr. Oliver, we encourage persons to register as soon as they believe they have a good or service that they want to be able to offer to the government. The registration process is a three-pronged process. The first requires you to pretty much just register. Doesn't even require you to attach your business license until the second phase when you go to update your profile. So to be able to register, for example, you have a new business that would have made application for a business license and still waiting to hear from the government, but believe that they would have provided all the necessary documents and just waiting for that business license to be approved. We encourage them to go online and register. That's the first stage. The first step is to actually make your intention known. Then on tomorrow, we will give that guidance and that training on that registration process. Then secondly, when you're required to actually go and do a bidding, then you are asked to ensure that all of those necessary documents, your business license, the tax compliance certificate, all of those other stuff is uploaded. But initially, the registration process is pretty much you showing an intention that you want to be a registered vendor with the government. And we encourage businesses straight across the Bahamas to go ahead and register that intention with us.
Yes, ma'am. If can I add, also, I'd just like to make mention to the three numbers that would possibly be able to help or assist if you ever come across any roadblocks: 357-8602, 376-5747, or 357-3690.
Thank you, Brianna. We'll also have those numbers available on the Ministry of Finance's social media pages, on the budget website, and on the website for the Department of Inland Revenue as well. So I want to thank all of our presenters. A final reminder and encouragement to please go to suppliers.gov.bs in order to get your business registered on the portal. This is your opportunity to be seen by all government agencies. I mean, as you know, in the normal course of business, when you're looking for a service, even in your own personal lives, you usually call a friend or ask a friend or look for service providers within your circle. In this system for the government procurement, now once your business is registered in the portal, any government agency, any department, any unit will have a full listing and directory and inventory of businesses that are available to provide this service. So you don't have to be somebody's friend, you don't have to know somebody, you don't have to be in business for 20 years and have a big advertising campaign. Once you are registered in the portal, you will appear in the listing of service providers who are registered to provide the services that you specialize in. So please, we encourage everybody to register on the portal at suppliers.gov.bs. I want to thank our presenter, Mr. Breon Scott, for his informative presentation. We'd like to thank Ms. Roll and Mr. Oliver for participating in the question and answer section around the Act. If you had any questions that were unanswered, you can continue to post them in the chat, as well as we'll have opportunities for follow-up on our social media where we're always engaging with the public. And once we continue our public education campaign, we'll have frequently asked questions available on the website as well. So thank you very much, Breon, Ms. Roll, and Mr. Oliver. We are going to move on to our next presentation, which will be switching gears a bit to talk about small business development and some of the services and facilities that are available for small businesses. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Ms. Davinia Bain. And she's going to be presenting to us on the small business opportunities available for small businesses. Davinia Bain is the Executive Director of the Access Accelerator Small Business Development Center, which is a nonprofit organization created to empower micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Ms. Bain recently served as the Vice President of Advancement at the University of the Bahamas, and she holds a Master's of Science degree in Decision Sciences and a Bachelor's in International Economics. I'd like to please welcome Ms. Bain to deliver a presentation on the opportunities available for small business development.
Thank you so very much, Noelle. Great to see you. Great to see everyone. Just before, while they load my slide, as we spoke a little bit earlier, the question came in about whether there was a percentage already set aside in the legislation, which obviously I can't speak to the legislation, but I would say prior to the legislation, the government's policy at that time was to encourage a minimum of 20% of the procurement budget for small businesses. So I can only imagine that when it is legislated or when any minister would decide to put aside a percentage, so that we will either be comparable or even better than the 20%. So we're very excited about the government's pro position on supporting small businesses through this piece of legislation and through the overall procurement budget. And you will see a little bit in my presentation directed towards our organization's support of businesses who will be attaining these types of procurement opportunities from the government. So let's get started. Today's presentation is really to talk about the ecosystem for small businesses, more so than anything else. And I think we really need to take this moment to celebrate that with a lot of the work that the SBDC Access Accelerator, I'm going to call the Access Accelerator A squared for much of this presentation, with much of the work that A Squared has been doing throughout the country and some of it with international partners, we've been doing our best to actually try to formalize or acknowledge the informal ecosystem that's been operating and now try and bring it together. So I think it's important for us to, first of all, just make sure we're all fully aware of why we exist. A Squared is a nonprofit. I know from time to time, it may be classified as a quasi-government agency, but I think it's important for everybody to know that we are formally registered as a nonprofit company. At the moment, the 99% of our entire budget is supported by the government, which makes us quasi. But as we mature in our existence, we have more and more donors coming and supporting the organization, and we expect for that to continue to grow over the years. But we're here to equip and empower MSMEs through tools, through resources, through strategic partnerships. This is why we exist. And this is what we've been doing from day one, and we're pretty excited about that. This slide we often talk about to show, what we've been doing since we started, but I want to look at this slide a little bit differently today because we're talking about the ecosystem. So when we move to the next slide, specifically to speak about the ecosystem, keep in mind that this ecosystem has served, when we say 1,934 clients, those are simply the clients that were funded through our organization. When we talk about clients who would have received either training hours, advisory hours, any type of business support, you're really talking more like 4,000 to 5,000 distinct clients. And then you have clients who would have received any number of those categories collectively. So the reach of this ecosystem, I think, is extremely significant. And it's good that we're now tracking the data. We're talking about over 40 industries, over 16 islands, and almost $70 million through the collective work of the ecosystem. So let's look at this ecosystem. I hope you can see it clearly in this little slide here, but this is growing quickly. And each one of these little circles have multiple entities within it. So for example, the Ministry of Finance is one of our major players, obviously. It's the ministry through which we receive our funding. And so that's important to us. It's also the ministry through which we ratify or validify a lot of the policies from the government that affect small businesses. So this is actually a two-way relationship in that as we work day in and day out with small businesses, we're able to say to the government, hey, here's some of the things that we've been seeing, here's some of the challenges, and we would recommend A, B, or C. And likewise, the government from their level would be able to see quite a bit of things are happening through their agencies and would have made policy recommendations to policymakers. And hence you see a lot of creative things happening right now in this space. Obviously, another huge partner in this overall ecosystem are the entrepreneurs themselves. We're extremely proud of how many Bahamian entrepreneurs are moving from the sidelines of what they want to do in their heads and getting the confidence to come forward and actually jump into the vision that they've been thinking and dreaming about all along. So this number is increasing, and we're happy to be a part of supporting that. And all of our ecosystem players are supporting these entrepreneurs. From the financial institutions point of view, again, this is a huge celebration for the ecosystem. When we first started, we had one commercial bank, RBC was a formal participant, even though there may have been other commercial banks assisting small businesses, because there wasn't a very clear definition. The ability to track that support was not as good as it is now. From day one, we had the Bahamas Development Bank with us and the Bahamas Venture Fund, Entrepreneurial Venture Fund, but now we also have Fidelity Bank, who signed on with us, and we're pretty excited about that, and two other banks we should hope to be able to announce very soon that have come on to formally acknowledge their support in significant ways of small businesses and this overall ecosystem. I see that we zoomed in a bit. Can we zoom out just a little bit for me so I can see the next area? Okay, private investors. So again, prior to the SPDC, you would have had any number of families or individuals informally acting as what we call in the business angel investors. Now we're happy to see that a number of these individuals are coming forward to the SPDC because we have the guarantee program. We're able to now guarantee some of their direct investment into our clients. So we're very excited that we have individuals now formally participating in this ecosystem. And you're going to hear a lot about this in the next couple of months as we create specific fora for private investors who would like to invest in the businesses coming through the Small Business Development Center. I've mentioned the venture fund already. The business development professionals, we are excited. We have quite a number of persons who have formally reached out to us to be certified as business plan writers for us or business development advisors for us. These are outsourced positions. So a number of persons before we started working would have had their own businesses doing the same things that we are doing as well. And so what we decided was, rather than us expanding to no end to be able to meet the demand of thousands of businesses who are interested in having these types of business development services, we've simply decided to try and standardize the quality of work, the type of work, the details that we would like in the output. And we have a certification that we're asking professionals to participate in, so that now when persons come to us to have their business plans written or to expand their businesses, we can automatically reach out to a list of professionals who are registered with us and have been certified. So we're excited about that. It's something new. We would have informally done it before, but now through the help of the IDB, we have a formal process for doing that. The Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants have been working with us from day one, practically, to bring together chartered accountants, certified accountants to assist us with our small businesses. So they're a critical part of the ecosystem, because it's impossible to be making money and not properly accounting for it, not being able to report to your investors, report to your guarantors, and just use it as a decision tool in your day-to-day business. So we're very happy about the support in this ecosystem from not just BICA, but there are some accountants that are in other types of associations, and we appreciate their role in the overall ecosystem. Now, the legal advisors, I want to say that when people think about businesses, unfortunately, the last part of the ecosystem that people automatically acknowledge may be the legal advisors, but it really should be your very first. Your organizational structure, your contracts, your agreements, all these types of things. Whether we're saying this not just as our organization, but many of us are in our own personal businesses, and we can see just how critical it is for this ecosystem to have a strong presence of legal advisors. And so whether you're formally connected with the SPDC or not, we've had the opportunity to interact with the lawyers of quite a number of our clients, and it's become a very smooth part of our operation. Now we can rely on the expertise of those lawyers to help us in the overall advising process. So they're a critical part of this ecosystem. Educators, whether it's UB, BTVI, a number of small organizations have been for some time now doing educational courses for businesses, but you can see, if you just do easy Google searches, you can see any number of individuals increasing their effort to service the thousands of businesses, again, who've come through our ecosystem looking for this type of assistance. The international development agencies are also extremely critical. Persons like the entities like the IDB and the World Bank have come forward with a total of about $45 million worth of support in guarantee pools just to support this ecosystem. And this is just the beginning of it. So we expect even more going forward from other agencies in this space. But it's important because the Bahamas being strong in our small business ecosystem really helps the region And it also helps all of our visitors that come here. So it's a global participation in making sure that the Bahamas has a very strong and robust economy. And of course, I put government agencies, not that it's last, but it's closer to the Ministry of Finance. You know, we're celebrating as well a lot of the digitization work of the government through its agencies, a lot of the advancements in the Department of Inland Revenue, which is critical for every single business because on an annual basis, and if you're filing VAT on a more frequent basis, you have to interact with these agencies. And so they're critical with again, the governance structure, the compliance of the ecosystem. And so the collaboration with these agencies is all a part of what we call a collective effort to make sure our businesses succeed. So let's go back a bit, when we talk about this 68 million and the 40 industries plus, all of these partners, all of these players in the ecosystem are part of the celebration and a part of the hard work to continue to keep the ecosystem sustainable and growing to help small businesses. And it's up to us to make sure that we can keep that going in perpetuity. That ecosystem would have provided the $68 million in approvals through different types of funding. The venture fund would have done around $1 million plus. And this year, according to our budget, we expect a much larger amount of equity investments from our equity partner. Guaranteed loans and direct loans, which would have included the business continuity loans, obviously is the lion's share as we're trying to pull ourselves out of the pandemic. Microloans, about 10%, and then government grants was a significant portion of the funding from this ecosystem, which accounted for about 21% of all of the funding. I know the time is running, so I want to just quickly mention the focal points. We mentioned earlier the government procurement process, and I want to say under our economic recovery focal point, we're excited to be able to support this year. We'll talk more about this in coming media events, be able to support clients who achieve or attain government contracts. This is critical because a lot of times persons will get a government contract and then you either go to consumer lending or you go to predatory lending for support to be able to fulfill the contract. And as a result, you completely erode your profit margins and it could affect your ability to actually service the contract. So we're going to partner with you in this initiative. We'll be announcing very soon to what extent, meaning the dollar value of support in this area, but it is a part of our overall economic recovery focal points. We've already done about 5 million, actually about 6 million in fishing and farming grants and funding. We expect that to continue with other forms of funding. The Orange Economy, we have not started formally that program, even though we have clients that would have been supported under that program. But in a concerted effort with the partners relevant to this area, we expect to do a lot of that this year. From a technology point of view, some of the funding has started, but the programming hasn't. So as we move into our new location and we open up the incubator, we're excited to be able to support technology companies in that space. And then we have concessionary rates for areas like manufacturing and energy to be able to support those areas. We'll continue to support islands that are suffering from Hurricane Dorian in this coming budget. The Youth Development Fund, again, that is well on its way. When we move into our new program, our new location, we'll be able to actually house the incubator for the Youth Development Fund, and a lot of the funding for that area will be able to flow after that time. Let me just move this. All right, so, and then the preschool program, there's some new things coming up this year, slightly different from what we did last year. And then there's another new program we'll be talking about very soon in terms of marginalized communities. So the ecosystem is a huge part of being able to successfully provide funding in these various areas. And the reason why I say that is that the Access Accelerator is actually a very small organization. We have less than 30 full-time employees. And so the work that we do through and with our partners is critical for us to be able to meet all of these focal points in one calendar year. So we're completely relying on the overall system to be able to service small businesses. And we actually find it a lot of joy in actually making the connections on behalf of our clients. So on any given time, we can be asked to make introductions, supplication, request exemptions, get different organizations to provide seminars that help specific groups of clients. So we'll continue doing that going forward. That said, if there's anyone listening wanting to know how to reach out to us, how to access all the things that I've mentioned, all of it is on the screen at the moment, and I'm definitely available for any questions. Thank you very much.
Davinia, for that great and informative presentation. It reminds me, I think maybe 3-4 years ago now, when the Ministry of Finance announced the government's policy as it relates to investing in the SBDC. It announced several policy pillars that were the basis of the investment that was being made in the SBDC and small business, MSME growth. And one of those was in order to stimulate and create a culture of entrepreneurship and to build an ecosystem for entrepreneurship that wasn't solely dependent on the government, but that really could support and allow entrepreneurs to thrive. And so to see the SBDC, to see you lay out what the ecosystem looks like today, I think is very important as it relates to, just the accountability on the use of public funds and the monies that have been invested in this, and the hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs that have participated in SBDC programs. So we are opening up the floor now for questions to Ms. Bain Grant about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and to have a conversation about, what that looks like and how the business community has been experiencing it, and where we see it going, and how we see it having had developed over, the number of years and through the SBDC's work. So I am opening the floor now for questions, and we're taking questions online from our Facebook viewing audience, as well as persons who are logged into the Zoom link. Okay, the first question. Is just about the process, the time for receiving decisions from the SBDC. The person wants to know if persons apply for a grant or a loan through the SBDC, what is the time period to hear back for a decision, noting that they've heard some persons have had to wait months for a response. Could you speak to that, please?
Okay, so different types of funding definitely has a different wait time. Each time we announce a new program, we pretty much give you at the beginning a timeline that you can expect based on that specific program. So grants, for example, typically take about a month of time for persons to be able to apply. And then once we close the application, then there's a vetting process and then the decision process, which typically takes 2 to 3 weeks post the grant. We find that there are a number of people who, even long after we've already posted results, sent results, sometimes the results are even online already, they're still saying that they haven't heard from us. In that instance, please check your spam, please call us. More than likely, there's something that went wrong in the email that you provided, or for some reason you haven't received our communication. The main form of communication for communicating the results is via the email address that you give us. Other than that, the next time that there will be anything specific will be when we post all of the results online, which all of the grants that we provide, the awardees are always posted within a week or two after we would have shared the successful awardees directly. And so with our normal program though, so the A Squared program, we call our mainstream program, right? This is where we actually take you through a lengthy process, to be quite frank, of business development, business advisory, business development, funding preparation. In some cases, we have to coach clients on, how to actually pitch their business, not just to our internal committee, but in preparation for them actually talking face to face to the banks. So there's a piece of this program that we're finding over and over persons aren't fully understanding. So I'm going to take this opportunity to restate it. The government guarantee program has two funding partners involved. The government, through the SBDC, provides a guarantee approval, and that's when you're waiting from us after you would have gone through the credit committee. Within a week's time or so, you will get an approval from us saying that, look, we have decided that after vetting your business, that we feel that we should support your business with the government's guarantee. We've done our fiduciary checks, we've done all of the business checks, and you are a good candidate for us to support with the government guarantee. That government guarantee is not initiated until you've been submitted to one of our funding partners, and any one of them need to decide that because of the guarantee or with the guarantee, we now have decided to invest X amount in credit funding to this client. At that time, and with their approval, the guarantee is attached to their funding. And so the exposure is really with the financial institution, and the government through the SBDC simply guarantees that. That process takes time because it's subject to the bank's decision process. Some banks decide within a couple of days. Some banks may take longer. And by banks, I should say financial institutions, because we have more than just the banks involved in our program. So that part is a bit up to the way the market works, the way the financial institutions adjudicate your application. What's unique about what we do, we actually, in some cases, end up having different financial institutions bid for the same business. And that again takes time, but it's to your benefit, because at the end of the day, you end up with the best rate and the best periphery of services that's packaged into what these financial institutions would like to offer you. So you find that the really strong businesses that come out of the Access Accelerator actually have multiple financial institutions bidding in one way or the next for their businesses. So I hope I've answered your question. It's actually not a straightforward answer. I can tell you though that we try our best to minimize the time between when your application is concluded and when you receive a response. And if you feel as though the time frame is inordinate, please reach back out to us and we'll be able to give you a direct response either through telephone, through social media, through email, any of those means.
Thank you very much. The next question is about whether or not this ecosystem has reached the Family Islands. Excuse me. So how is the Access Accelerator and how is this ecosystem that you described helping entrepreneurs in the Family Islands? And this person specifically wants to know how a Crooked Islander is able to access services and opportunities through the Access Accelerator.
Okay, so before we speak specific to Crooked Island, I want to say that the ecosystem is definitely healthy straight throughout the Family Islands. The numbers that we presented earlier, again, were across 16 different islands. And some of the, more than just SBDC, some of the other players in the ecosystem have a strong presence as well on a number of the Family Islands. SBDC itself has a presence in Grand Bahama, Abaco, Eleuthera, Exuma, Long Island, Andros. I think that's all where we have a specific representative. All the other islands are serviced through technology, even before the pandemic, where everything necessitates virtual meetings. Even prior to that, we were doing that throughout the ecosystem. But if you look at it, BAIC, for example, is one of our agencies that we're in partnership with in the ecosystem. They have offices throughout the islands. The Venture Fund does work throughout the islands. The BDB has offices and representatives throughout the islands. And some of the other ecosystem players, the UB has representatives throughout the islands. And so, yes, this is definitely a Bahamas-wide ecosystem. Now, Crooked Island in particular Again, we do have clients from Cricket Island. We have done one that I know of clearly, one virtual seminar for a cluster of islands that included Cricket Island. But I'm not 100% sure whether we have any of the ecosystem partners having a physical presence in Cricket Island. And so that probably is something that we need to look at and see which players are already on the island who can become a formal part of the ecosystem so that we can funnel on the ground information and technical assistance to players who are already there. Otherwise, we remain virtual in this ecosystem and can support any island.
Thank you very much. So please, if you're an entrepreneur in Crooked Island, opportunities are available for you. You can go to the website, the Access Accelerator's website. Davinia, if you could just give us that URL.
It's www.accessaccelerator.org.
Okay, so please visit accessaccelerator.org, O-R-G, so that you can sign up for some of the opportunities and participate in the programs that are available. The next question is about, well, it's a two-part question. The first one is about the monitoring of the use of funds and the success rates associated with the different investments that the SBDC facilitates. And the second question is about the impact of the pandemic on businesses that have been funded or supported by the SBDC. Specifically, have any of them folded?
Okay, so firstly, from a monitoring point of view, in terms of the way the clients have been able to take the funding and either sustain or grow their businesses, I would invite you to, again, go to our website and look at our annual reports. We have two annual reports already posted, 2 or 3, sorry, I'm mixing it up. 2 annual reports already posted, and we're currently working on the third one for the year that ended on June 30th, and that should be posted in the next couple of months for you to be able to see. In each of our annual reports, we also post or publish our economic impact data. That economic impact data will be able to give you specific information on what our clients have been doing, the sales that they've been able to produce, and as a result, the economic impact that they've provided. And I want to make sure I get all of the questions. Can you repeat the second question for me, please?
Yes.
Noelle?
The second part was about the impact of the pandemic on clients of the SBDC, and specifically if any of the businesses have unfortunately folded.
Okay, so again, in that economic impact report, the last report we did actually had very specific questions to the pandemic. And it would tell you, how many of the businesses said that they had to lay off employees or furlough employees. And we were surprised that the numbers were quite strong in terms of businesses being able to sustain their employee base and their operations even through the pandemic. You may recall with the business continuity program that it was mandated that you had to retain at least 50% of all of your employees to receive the funding, and the checkpoints throughout the disbursement ensured that. And then also, because of the business continuity program, we were able to create deferrals. In the first instance, they were about 4 months, and then it moved up to about 8 months, where persons had a lot of time before they had to begin repaying. And I'm happy to say that in that portfolio right now, according to recent reports, we still have none of those companies folding. While there are some delinquencies, but those companies are still, by and large, operational. When I say none of the companies folding, none of the loans have defaulted. Let's be clear on that. The majority of all of the businesses are still operational. And we've been working with the financial institutions that they would have booked those loans directly with for the support of the pandemic, to make sure we're as flexible as possible with those businesses. Now, that will not go on forever. The expectation is that businesses will use the grace period that they receive to strengthen what they're doing in their businesses and be able to repay the loans. And anyone not repaying, as we've made very clear from the beginning of this exercise will be, there's several consequences, one of which is that you will be reported to the credit bureau through those financial institutions. So this will affect your ability going forward, not just as a business, but as an individual, if I'm not mistaken, with future acquisition of credit. So yeah, none of that portfolio has defaulted. We do, however, in our Access Accelerator program, there are 2 companies so far that have defaulted, and we're working with all of the other companies that might have had some challenges. Those are still going concerns, and those loans are still being serviced, even if there are some difficulties. So to be quite frank, after $68 million worth of funding, the lion's share of which I think we saw in the chart presented earlier, about 68% of that is in loans. If you add the 9 for microloans, so that's 77% of all of that 68 million is in loans. To be able to say today that we only have 2 defaults, we're pretty happy about that. It could have been a lot worse given Hurricane Dorian and given the pandemic. And so we spend hours day in and day out working with our clients to help them ensure that they are not only able to service their loans, but more importantly, that they have robust businesses despite whatever economic challenges are in our economy at the moment.
Thank you very much. I think that answer will be very helpful to the person online and everybody watching. So we have just a few more, sorry, excuse me. We have just a few more questions under this topic, and then we will transition to our third and final presentation. So the question is about whether or not a business needs to have its business license already and or tax compliance before applying for a grant, or can they apply while they're going through the process of applying for their business license and other certificates?
Okay, very good question. And unfortunately, the answer varies again. We've had to be nimble based on what type of programs that we're working with. I want to say that with the grant program, so let's answer this in the context of, for all of our grant programs, we may have anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 persons applying, and in most instances, the largest number of applications we were able to approve in any of our grant programs, I think, was about 250, 246 out of thousands of applications. And so simple things like you already having a business license up to date becomes a critical factor in separating the goat from the sheep, per se. And so before I properly answer the question, I want to say to any business, you do not need the event or the moment of a grant application to keep you compliant with the government. It's important. I mean, you're reaching out to the government for financial assistance. At the very least, let's stay compliant, because you never know when there are other benefits that you're missing out simply because you're not in the system. So for example, when we have larger businesses or a larger partner say to us, look, do you have a list of X type of businesses? We go to Gaynell and her team and say, Gaynell, can you pull all of the companies in your registry that may be licensed under this particular industry, and we can provide that type of bespoke assistance. But if you're not in the system, we're not able to do that. If we're looking to create policy for different types of industries, we need to know who's in the system. So please stay current with your business licenses every year. The same time of year is when it's expected for you to be current. So let's not let the moment of a grant application be the one where you remember that you're not compliant. That said, for the majority of our grant programs, we've been lenient, allowed people to, at the very least, show that you've started the process with Gaynell and her team at DIR, and before, if you are approved before there's any disbursement, it has to be complete. That's been, a level of leniency that we're able to provide. Not one that I could say that I'm 100% in support of, but we're a team at the Access Accelerator, and so the team's decision was, let's provide some wiggle room. And some of the smaller grants where we really only have a certain amount of grants we could give out, and we have thousands of people applying, we're hard and fast that, look, you need to come in with that business license from day one. In terms of NIB compliance, though, which a lot of people also seem to forget, that as small businesses, in particular self-employed businesses, you are expected to be NIB compliant. Again, those types of things we cannot bend on, because in moments of crises we run to NIB for assistance. But if you're not up to date as a group, as a class, it makes it difficult to be able to see what type of assistance needs to go to which types of institutions. So please, tax compliance, government compliance is critical, and let's not cut those corners.
Thank you very much. And as I said earlier, in relationship to the supplier registry, we echoed those sentiments as well. And the Department of Inland Revenue, I'm aware, is doing a number of things to make it easier and easy to be in compliance. You don't have to think you have to be a large business to get a business license. The process for sole proprietors and small businesses is relatively simple, and with the provisional license system, you can get a license, in under a week, in a matter of 3-5 days. So please don't be intimidated by the requirements or the ask even. We encourage you to go out there and get your business license to keep current, so that you can take advantage of all the different opportunities. So the final question is about the different areas of focus. And it appears to be coming from Androsian. So glad to see that we have a lot of Family Island representation today. And the question is there a particular area of focus or interest from a funding point of view, for example, farming or fishing, when it comes to applications from a specific island? The example that was given is that if 2 Androsians apply for a grant, and one business is farming focused and the other is a bookstore or a stationery store, will the farming business get priority consideration for the grant because there's a declared focus on farming and fishing, for example?
Okay, man, this is a really great question. So to date, my answer would be no. We have created different types of grant programs to be able to segregate by industry. So for example, we had a fishing and farming grant program, of which Andros got a lot of successful applications. So, I want to celebrate that with that island, given that it is a strategic focus in many instances for the island's economic activity. But for example, under our standalone grant program, we have not applied specific focal points in terms of industries for any particular island. And so the decision in the example that was provided, whether 2 people apply and you only could give to one of those 2 companies, whether the fishing and farming client will get it over and above the other one, I cannot say that's not in our decision criteria matrix. The decision criteria would start with basic things, for example, first of all, compliance. The extent to which somebody took the time to properly complete all of the application and the responses, the viability of the business, how many employees, the number of employees that can be supported from the business is a huge part, because a lot of times when we do these grants, the whole point is economic impact, and one of the numbers for economic impact comes from your employee base and some other things that we won't go through today. And so, no, I would say that that's not currently a way to prioritize who will get and who would not get. In the future, mind you, as grant funds become more and more scarce, it may become. But at the moment, because we're still relying on a lot of the previous research for each of the strategic advantages of the islands, and we haven't actually gone through and done any updated work to see how those islands have progressed with those industries. We will not stifle one island into one area. However, we will provide support, like we have a full-time team member, Tyranny Darrell, who lives in Andros, to support the fishing and farming clients. However, she supports other clients as well. Her and her team recently hired a business development personnel to assist with writing plans that are not related to fishing and farming for entrepreneurs in Andros. So we have to remain nimble as these economies are still really finding their strength in different areas and in complementary areas. You know, you may have fishermen and farmers, but there's so many other things that that focal point needs and support on that island that we don't want to just X out or exclude the other industries that could be vibrant on that island.
Thanks very much for that. And we are coming to the end of our Q&A section for Ms. Bain Grant on the Small Business Development Center Access Accelerator and the ecosystem for entrepreneurs. Any final thoughts before we head out?
I just really want to say thank you to our ecosystem partners. We would not have been able to help so many small businesses during this short period of time if it were not for everybody doing their piece of the puzzle. And I want to encourage other persons who want to become a part of the ecosystem. Please reach out to us if you need to be introduced to any of the other ecosystem players. We'd be more than happy to facilitate that. And stay tuned for more from this ecosystem.
Well, thank you very much for your time today and for the presentation and facilitating all of those questions. We appreciate it, and good luck to your team. Continue to grow, to do great work. We really appreciate that. And to all of the participants, as well as persons listening online, we encourage you to continue to dream and pursue those entrepreneurial aspirations. Yes, business on the whole is hard. It's not easy being a business owner. But it is possible, and there are many Bahamians, young and old, doing it every day, starting small and putting one foot in front of the other. So there are a lot of people working to make it easier for small businesses, to build out this ecosystem so everybody feels fully supported, having access to capital, having access to the guidance in terms of business planning and business management and strategy. So there's a whole ecosystem out there ready and available to support you. So please continue to pursue those dreams and get involved in starting your business and getting involved in this entrepreneurial push. So thank you very much and have a great day, Ms. Bain Grant. We are now going to switch gears again. If you need a sec to get some water, to step away, don't go too far, because I'm going to be introducing our next speaker, who is another young, dynamic professional working in the Ministry of Finance, who is going to be speaking about the Public Financial Management Act, which is another one of the pieces of legislation recently enacted during the budget cycle this year. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Jasmine Ajib, who serves as a finance associate at the Ministry of Finance. She holds a master's degree in public management, which she obtained at a university in South Korea, and a bachelor's of arts in international development studies and political science, which she pursued in Canada. I've personally worked with Ms. Ajib in not only the work in preparation for this webinar, but as we've all been trying to be educated on all of the legislation. She's young, dynamic, full of energy, and full of knowledge. And so we welcome you to the webinar and turn the floor over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to be presenting to you some key provisions from the Public Finance Management Act that are most relevant to you as members in the business community. Just want to make sure my clicker is working. Okay, it does. Perfect. Now, this is a very comprehensive, very detailed piece of legislation. So what I want to do first is capture some of the key highlights as to what this act does. Previously, ministries only had to report on what they were spending money on. So reporting requirements were essentially limited. Even bodies like government business enterprises and local government had no reporting mandates. Moving forward, however, every level of government has to track and report all their spending and the impact of their spending. And they do this through monthly, quarterly, mid-year, and annual reports. In addition, the newly prescribed annual plan and business plan did not exist previously. And let me explain why these are important. The reports I just mentioned are measured against the annual and business plans to essentially track financial and non-financial performance. So this is a very key change that we want to make note of. We also want to note that previously, some key finance activities operated informally, meaning there was no clear procedure as to how these activities were carried out. So moving forward, that changes. We see that, for example, there are now formal procedures in place for very important activities like national emergency expenditure. There is an entire section in this act that outlines the boundaries and guidelines as to how the Minister of Finance can utilize emergency expenditure. And lastly, there has been in the past a lacking coordination between stakeholders, both within and without the public sector. What the PFM Act does in this regard is set out clearly defined roles and responsibilities to facilitate a smooth business operation, and also to ensure greater scrutiny on any future government. You will find that in reading this act, there is no ambiguity as to who is responsible for what. And in fact, almost every matter involves multiple stakeholders, so nearly nothing is done in isolation. A final point that I want to highlight is that moving forward, the treasurer will now be known as the accountant general. Her roles have been better fleshed out in this PFM Act, and so naturally it allows for a more appropriate position title. Now we wanted to take a look at some key reports. In terms of the overall reporting requirements for the entire public sector, there are 3 important reports that we want to mention. First is the monthly summary report. This is prepared and published by the Financial Secretary and provides information on how the government performs in terms of revenue, expenditure, and borrowings. What this means is that post-approval of the annual budget and the Appropriation Act, stakeholders must keep track on the progress of the overall government up to the mid-year mark. So of course, this includes any key developments that may impact public finances. The second report is the quarterly report. This reflects the government's financial performance based on the expectations set out in the annual budget and the Appropriation Act. So you will notice that these reports have very specific deadlines attached to them. In fact, all of them do. The quarterly report, for example, ought to be published 4 weeks after the end of the quarter. The only exception here is the fourth quarter, which is required to be submitted 8 weeks after the end. What these deadlines do is they sort of put meat to the bones, if you may, on the reporting requirements, meaning it sets out clearly when these reports ought to be submitted, leaving more room for accountability to take its course. And finally, we want to mention the mid-year review, to be submitted every February. This report reflects the government's progress as measured against the fiscal strategy report and the annual budget. Its content is detailed in the 4th schedule of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2018, so I encourage you to take a look at that act. On this slide, we will now discuss really briefly about the accountability for state-owned enterprises. Now, an important thing to note is that this PFM Act sort of changes how we classify government bodies. So when we talk about a ministry or an agency or a government business enterprise, we're talking about a very distinct, very different government body. And this is important because each classification has its own unique reporting requirements. That said, government business enterprises, or GBEs, hereafter, are also known as state-owned enterprises. The terms are interchangeable. But we know that just as state-owned enterprises, GBEs are bodies that are owned and controlled by the government and operate in the public sector. I now want to draw your attention to this orange box. It states that there is a different treatment for publicly listed GBEs with a minority government shareholding, or in which the government holds more than 50%, but less than 100% of shares. And this is largely in reference to the reporting requirements. Essentially, what this means is that where the government has a minority shareholding, so less than 50% of shares, in a publicly listed company, the reporting requirements set out in this PFM Act for GBEs simply do not apply. However, where the government holds more than 50%, but less than 100% of the shares in a publicly listed company, the reporting requirements for GBEs apply to a certain extent. And what's that extent? It's the extent to which the requirements in this act are consistent with the Companies Act of 2000. I believe, though, that the most important point to mention here is how the PFM Act puts a mandate on GBEs in terms of ensuring accountability and transparency. So applicable GBEs must submit a business plan and a statement of corporate intent to the Minister of Finance and their responsible minister by the 15th of December in each year. The content for these documents are slated out in the 8th and 9th schedules of the Act. So you might just want to make a mention of that, the 8th and 9th schedules. Moving forward, we will now look at stronger sanctions for offenses. So the PFM Act now places a stronger mandate for offenses to become public knowledge. Of course, no one wants their name, position, offense, and sentence to be published in the Gazette and on the official government website. So this provision serves as a deterrent to discourage any public officer or public office holder from practicing misconduct, essentially. I want to now draw your attention to this yellow upper box. This lists the offenses relevant in this section. So, should a public officer or public office holder commit any of these offenses without lawful authority, they would be held liable on a summary conviction to one of the three consequences captured below. An offense, for example, can be taking possession of public resources, dishonestly appropriating public resources, providing inaccurate financial information, or concealing information to gain a benefit for yourself or for someone else, or soliciting or receiving bribes. So the consequences include 5 years imprisonment, a fine of $100,000, or both. Now we'll talk about a very exciting provision, I would say. It's a very unique provision in the Act, and it's called objection to direction. Essentially, any public officer who receives a direction that they believe or know to be contrary to this Act, or any other legislation for that matter, they are then empowered to submit a written objection to the person who gave them that direction. The process, though, doesn't end there. Earlier, we talked about how many matters in this Act involve multiple stakeholders. So that public officer will then also provide a copy of their written objection to the permanent secretary and any two of the following stakeholders. So that can be the chairperson of the Public Service Commission, the Attorney General, or the Financial Secretary. What this provision seeks to do is empower any public officer to be able to safeguard themselves against any future liability while upholding their oath. Now, for the latter part of this presentation, we're going to be looking at some other key changes. That's in terms of tax measures and business compliance. Requirement for a TCC. Now, a tax compliance certificate is required for the following purposes. This is when you would want to submit a tender for the award of a contract with government bodies. So this relates now to procurement. This is also where the contract value is $10,000 or more. In that case, it would be for collecting payment for services rendered under that value of a contract. Thirdly, this will be used for receiving a concession. And fourthly, this will be used for registering the ownership or changing the ownership in any registrable good that the tax is required to be paid on. I now draw your attention to the blue box at the very bottom. It states that the Minister of Finance may permit the award of a procurement contract without having a TCC, where he finds that it is in the public interest to do so. So there is some leeway for the Minister of Finance to be able to utilize that.
Thank you.
A continuation. If the applicant for a TCC is a company, then the PFM Act sets out these provisions to apply. The Financial Secretary is legally justified to require any company or business with similar shareholding to satisfy its tax obligation before a TCC is issued. In this regard, you will see at the very bottom of the screen, I have that a similar shareholding means that significant shareholders are represented in the same proportion in another company. Now, the basis on which the Financial Secretary can issue this requirement is where he has reasonable cause to believe that the company was established to evade tax payments due by the applicant company. Now, here are some quick notes to remember in terms of issuing and revoking a TCC. You will notice that in both regards, the Financial Secretary has purview over the matter. In terms of issuing a TCC, the application form is sent to the Financial Secretary for approval. And if issued, the TCC is valid for 6 months, as opposed to a lesser time previously. Now, in terms of revoking a TCC, the Financial Secretary may do so if he finds that the applicant knowingly submitted information that was found to be materially incomplete, false, or likely or calculated to deceive. So I'm sure you can see from these provisions that the PFM Act sets clear boundaries to help better regulate finance activities. We are now on our second to last slide. And on this slide, we will look at the offense relating to a TCC, clearly set out in the PFM Act. As mentioned just a moment ago, if a person submitted information that is incomplete, false, or intended to deceive, or if a person forges a TCC or becomes in possession with a forged TCC, he or she is liable on summary conviction. The consequence? A fine of $10,000 or 2 years imprisonment. And now we've reached the final slide of this presentation. And here you see precisely laid out the relevant dates of implementation for certain provisions in the Act. Reason being, public finance reform is a very comprehensive and nuanced process. So on this slide, you see illustrated that these changes don't take place all in once, but over a period of time. And to be more precise, the final due date is the year 2025, and we're just now in 2021. So let's go through it. We are currently in the ongoing phase of implementation and startup for provisions that are most relevant to the budget process. And you see those examples listed below. For example, the budget reserve appropriation, contingencies funds, firemen's, etc. Going forward, by September 1st, we ought to have our internal committee up and running, and we are well on our way with that process. Going down, by January 2022, cash planning and management, as well as the finance asset management strategy, should be well on their way. What I really want to highlight now, though, is that the reporting requirements that we spoke about, they're not due to be fully implemented until the year 2022. So the monthly report is first in line to be implemented by the 31st of January in 2022. And the remaining reports, and that's for public entities, GBEs, and even local government, they are to be implemented by the 1st of July in 2022. And finally, by the 1st of July in 2023, all levels of the public sector should be operating to the same financial year as the central government. And by 2025, the schedule of capital assets should be implemented. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, for that presentation. Very comprehensive and informative. So we are going to move on to question and answers. Just a few reminders and highlights as we move into that. The first one is a reminder of where you can learn about this, where you can actually see the acts. You can go to the Bahamas Budget website, which is bahamasbudget.gov.bs. And under the legislation section, you can download all of the acts. In fact, the full list of legislation that was enacted as a part of the budget cycle, the most recent budget cycle, so that you can read through the acts yourselves. We will be providing ongoing public education. So if that is too much of a chore or too intimidating, I don't like to read legislation either. It's very confusing. We will be doing ongoing public education, producing guides and frequently asked questions, as well as having other engagements. But if you'd like, please go to bahamasbudget.gov.bs to download the legislation. To Jasmine's presentation, just to highlight this reporting requirements in terms of, in particular, what Jasmine was referring to. I know in the Ministry of Finance, ahead of this legislation coming into effect about 2 or maybe 3 years ago, the Ministry of Finance, in fact, started to do budget performance reporting. And every quarter for the past 3 years, the Ministry of Finance has been producing quarterly budget performance reports. Now, this has really set a new standard, and imagine now when every government entity across the breadth of the central government is now producing monthly, quarterly, and annual reports. The level of transparency and the accountability that it will provide, or the system of accountability it will provide to the general public. Having participated in even just the quarterly budget performance reporting, it transforms even how the ministries and the departments have to conduct themselves, because they have to make sure at these periodic intervals that they are doing a status check and looking not just at what is being spent significantly with the new legislation, as Jasmine described. Now government entities have to report on the impact of that spending, and that is one of the key aspects of the new legislation. Not just focused on how much is being spent, but focused, and not even what it's being spent on, but focused also on the impact that that expenditure is having on the objectives in the first place that the government was trying to achieve. Also want to just highlight what was mentioned in terms of the reframing of how we see state-owned enterprises. And the Act creates a new name for these entities called government business enterprises. And from the very name, it's not just a matter of semantics, it's about how does the government now and how do we as the public now see these organizations. In the past, you know, they were not under the system of accountability in the way that they now are. And you know, they've been a financial strain in a large extent on the government. Now they have to think of themselves as business enterprises and really now be accountable for how they manage their finances. So those are a few things that I really wanted to make sure that you did not miss. The tax compliant things, businesses will need to make sure that they are up to speed on those new regulations and requirements, and we will support you again with ongoing education. The Department of Inland Revenue, of course, is the agency that really governs those aspects to a large extent, and their website, inlandrevenue.finance.bs, is where businesses go to ensure that their tax obligations are up to date as it relates to their business fees and taxes. So I want to thank Jasmine again and open up the floor for questions. I think Ms. Roll is still with us, so she will get in on answering any questions related to the Public Finance Management Act, as well as Ms. Ajib will be available for your questions. So the first question is about protection for whistleblowers. and persons or officers that object to direction or any instructions that they've been having. And I know, Ms. Ajib, you spoke to that, but if you could just go over that again and really explain what's the significance of this new provision and how it will support public servants and public officers in when they want to, report something that they feel is out of step with the law.
Yeah, sure. No, that's a great question. I think just to flesh it out a little bit better, essentially what it seeks to do is that oftentimes, especially me as a public officer, if I feel as though if I feel intimidated by my supervisor, that they gave me a direction and I feel like it's illegal essentially, what this act does is it gives me a safeguard. So once I submit that written objection to the person who gave me the direction, as well as I listed the other stakeholders, that now puts me in a safeguard so that if something comes up in the future, I can now show evidence that I objected to this direction. So whatever matter it was, I'm protected from any liability. So essentially, when it comes to a whistleblower protection, I would just say, I don't know about that law as yet. That's something I'm currently reading to understand as well. But no, essentially this seeks to just put a safeguard for any future liability.
Okay, Noel, if I would just add to that, and that was a good explanation and giving clarity as provided by Mr. Gabe, I would have responded in the answer in the chat that the Code of Ethics speaks to giving whistleblowers that protection. That Code of Ethics is in its final vetting process. It's now before the law reform. And once that is true, we will make that available to the general public. So as Jasmine would have mentioned, oftentimes you would find that employees would say that I was instructed to do X, Y, Z, and that one was above my pay grade, so I acted as per the instructions given by my superior. And this a piece of legislation seeks to give that staff member all of the necessary precautions to be able to protect and safeguard themselves. And so no longer you would find public officers being able to use the excuse that I was so instructed. If you feel that what you are asked to do is contrary or in direct conflict to your work procedures as you know it, this piece of legislation gives you directives on how to be able to handle that. And again, the Code of Ethics seeks to protect our whistleblowers.
Thank you. And this is really an important piece of the legislation as it relates to new standards of accountability. And really putting civil servants in a position of more, an empowered position. So they now have a process where they can feel protected and, the fear of any discrimination or any retribution, because now the law creates this pathway. Any further escalation would naturally be in further contravention of the law. And so this is an important piece of legislation now for the protection of civil servants, but also for the accountability of the entire governance system, which obviously, the general public and the business community have a desire to see. The next question is about whether there will be a newsletter or some system to share access to these reports once they are published, besides the newspaper or website. I can share that the Central Communications Unit in the Ministry of Finance, I serve in the capacity as a communications consultant to that unit. We do have a Ministry of Finance newsletter. And if you go to the Bahamas Budget website, which is bahamasbudget.gov.bs, you're able to subscribe to the Ministry of Finance's newsletter. And certainly through our Ministry of Finance newsletter, the communications team sends out email blasts and newsletters that we would share this information with. So there are many ways that you can engage with us. The social media pages of the Ministry of Finance, the website, as well as an email blast where you just need to subscribe to our newsletter. And we will certainly keep you informed. And the team in the ministry, a very, very capable team in the Central Communications Unit, will be able to support you in that. So the next question is about tax compliance. Will there be a direct tax compliance verification portal created for businesses to quickly check their business tax status? Right now, we have to dig through the DIR website, and the person would like to know if we are developing a verification portal to do a quick check of your business tax status. I think I'd throw that to Ms. Roll, who would have just
Yes.
left her capacity as the acting controller in the Department of Inland Revenue.
I'm trying to understand if the person is a business owner, what capacity are they speaking in? Because the process does not allow you to do a digging through. What it does is that there is a very quick, once you would have accessed the portal, you would have signed in and logged into that portal. There is a tab that says accounts. You click that tab that says accounts, and then you would see compliance certificate. It takes less than 3 minutes to make application for a tax compliance certificate. Once that comes into the Department of Inland Revenue, the vetting officer then makes communication and contact with all of the agencies. We're looking at road traffic, we're looking at national insurance, we're looking to see if you have any outstanding real property tax, any outstanding business license fees. And once that is checked and you're verified to be okay, that tax compliance certificate is issued. If we find from in inquiring with those agencies that you are not in compliance, for example, you would have an outstanding amount with, let's just say NIB, you are then encouraged to go and visit the NIB office. You can go to NIB or any of those agencies and make good. Sometime it's where you would be able to make a payment plan, even as it relates to the Department of Inland Revenue itself, where you might have outstanding obligations for taxes for real property, VAT, or business license. And once you come into an agreement or consider to be in good standing, we will then go back and do another check. Once we get a report, then you are issued a tax compliance certificate. And normally that tax compliance certificate, as per law, the new law, is issued for a period of 6 months. So any business that you would have engaged where you are seeking to get payment from the government, or where you need to provide that tax compliance certificate for some concession, you would be able to use that same tax compliance certificate throughout the duration of its valid life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Oh, that would answer that question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Roll. And just to add to the perspective, persons might not be aware the Department of Inland Revenue has been really at the forefront of digitization in government and the use of digital and online platforms to make it easier to conduct business with the government, particularly through DIR. And the process that Ms. Roll just described, one of the transitions that happened in the past few years was that rather than businesses having to go to each of the different government agencies themselves, they make one application, and in the back end, the background, the government, the DIR takes on the responsibility of coordinating all the agencies in order to send one communication back to the taxpayer or the business owner. But in addition to that, in the background right now, as the digital transformation process continues to evolve, all of the government agencies, including DIR, are working to create an even higher level of integration in the back end. So as each ministry, each agency, and each department gets further along in their digital transformation process, some of these things like checking between ministries and agencies, even for a TCC, will become more and more automated. There's already a level of automation and integration right now, which is why the process can be delivered in the way that Ms. Roll just described. But that will even enhance and deepen as more agencies and departments get further along with the digital transformation process. So as Ms. Roll said in her opening statement, change takes time, and transformation is a process, not just with legislative reform, but definitely with digital transformation as well. So please be encouraged to go to the Inland Revenue website when you want to apply for your tax compliance certificate, and the department and its workers will do all the rest in the background so that you would be able to have a quick status check on whether or not you're in compliance. The onus will still be on
And
you.
well, that is so well mentioned by yourself. And just to speak to that integrated financial management system process, the IFMAS that government is so eagerly working on, you would find that the Department of Inland Revenue is so well advanced in that now we have other agencies that will actually be able to log in to the Department of Inland Revenue Revenue Management System and be able to see if you actually have a current business license and what your status is. We have the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Works, all of those key agencies that are now integrated and having a direct talk, e-talk with the system, the revenue management system in the Department of Inland Revenue as government moves to seek to enhance the integrated financial management system, which is called the IFMAS.
Thank you again, Ms. Roll. Tomorrow you'll hear more about the different software tools that the government is going to be using to support the digital transformation. But suffice to say, a lot of work is happening behind the scenes. One of the principles driving digital transformation, at least within the Ministry of Finance ecosystem, is the idea of sort of one and done. Means, if 10 agencies need to see your business license, you shouldn't have to request that and provide it to the 10 agencies. The system that Ms. Roll just described, how that works in principle is that the ministries, the agencies, the departments, they don't need you to provide it to them because they can go into the centralized system and they can see it themselves. And so I know many of these things are being long awaited by the business community, and I'm sure most of the transformation is happening slower than persons would like, but be assured that this work is happening, and new benefits are being rolled out bit by bit. And over time, we truly, the government will be able to get to that level of automation and integration that is taking place now. Okay, so another question on the public financial management, again, is around government business enterprises and formerly known as state-owned enterprises. So what was the system before? Why is the new, you said that, this is Ms. Ajib, you said that the government business enterprises now will be subject to these new requirements. Does that mean that they didn't have to provide any reporting before? Could you speak a bit more about, how this new legislation is bringing them under the fold and bringing more accountability to the system?
Oh yeah, 100%. And maybe afterwards, Ms. Roll might want to add some more to have a more sufficient response. But even when I first got on the team and I was speaking with different stakeholders in the Ministry of Finance to understand that. So what was the intent for this provision? Why is it that now government business enterprises have to submit these reports? And the short answer is because it wasn't done before. And so, the main goal of this act is to, across the board of the public sector, increase accountability and transparency, which of course includes publicly listed companies that come under, to some extent, the government. So the short answer is yes, because it wasn't done before. And so that's now why these reporting requirements are mandated, so that the public and the government can have a proper holistic understanding of essentially where we are in terms of public finance management. I don't know if Ms. Roll might want to add to that, but that would be my answer.
Jasmine, that is really, really good. And that's a thorough answer. I endorse.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Roll, could you speak to the implementation? Ms. Ajib would have shown the implementation schedule, which this particular act, the Public Financial Management Act, is going to take, I think the last date, Ms. Ajib, correct me if I'm wrong, was 2023?
2025.
25, okay. So we're talking about, a 4-year time period in order to implement this act. Could you speak about, why is it going to take until 2025 in order to implement it? And how will we ensure that when we get to that point, we'll actually meet our targets? What does the whole process look like in order to get there?
Okay, if we look at public financial management and it being incorporated or instituted all across the world, some countries would have started back in 2017 and is still in the process of completing the implementation of a public financial management act. It's all comprehensive. It goes into the different phases that we have to do. If we remember, we're moving on to an accrual basis, accounting reporting. This is all a part of the Financial Management Act. There are various moving pieces, mechanism in place that we must ensure each step of the way it lines up. So beginning with getting all of the agencies on board, that's a process for them to change their method and their modes of operation. If we remember before, government operated strictly from a cash basis, getting our agencies to understand and to communicate with each other, the Treasury Department, all of, as Jasmine would have mentioned, the GBEs and the SOEs, getting all of them to understand. It's a phased-in process. As we would have mentioned, there's no magic switch that you can flip and the act suddenly becomes implemented. As with starting and growing your business, you know that there is a phase-in process. It's called change management. How do we get each of the moving parts, each of the stakeholders, internal and external stakeholders, to comply? And while we do that and put it into action, how do we debug? How do we tweak? How do we make it better? With anything, the implementation phase is always followed by a monitoring and also getting back to say, did this work? How do we do this better? What are stakeholders saying? How did it impact stakeholders? So it's an ongoing process, involve all of us, the internal and external stakeholders.
Thank you very much. So just a few final questions in this section before we wind down for the day. The next question is about the idea that you mentioned, Ms. Ajib, and if both of you could speak to this transition from an administrative approach to public finance management to an outcomes-based approach. What does that really mean when we talk about administration to outcomes? What is changing and how significant is this?
Okay, Ms. Roll, do you want to go first? Or?
Oh, okay, I'll start and then I'll allow you to, or should I let you go and then I piggyback off of you? You can talk from the act and then I'll talk with the technical aspect.
Sure. So from the act, honestly, I think for me as a young professional now working in the government, this was really refreshing to see in the act. It's very exciting and encouraging to know that when we talk about, like, my background is public policy. So of course, any government will want to make as informed of a decision as possible when it comes to policy making decisions. So shifting from an administrative approach to an outcome-oriented approach means that informed decision can be better had. So what this act does is places those clearly set roles and responsibility set up in a clear hierarchical structure in terms of a system flow, as well as provisions and guidelines and boundaries to better help regulate that. So from a legislative perspective, that would be my response.
Okay, so you, the business community, you, the general public, you, John Doe, has demanded this change. You have called for more accountability with the government. You have called for us to not only speak it, but to show it. And to be accountable, what this does for us is actually help us to capture the data, monitor the financial and non-financial performances, and be able to report that to you in a systematic fashion and one that can be certified by yourselves as being accurate. You required from us and you asked for us to be more accountable and to be more transparent. These are the processes that we are engaging for more transparency and more accountable, to be able to be accountable to you, the Bahamian public. And once we do that, we believe that you will be more forthright in compliance with the Act. You'll be more forthright in reporting your business turnover. You'll be more forthright in reporting what you would have collected as it relates to value-added tax and giving that to the government. And not only that, you will be more supportive in saying to the government, I appreciate what you're doing. I recommend that you should now do this, or this is change and this is what we'd like to see. So this is an olive branch in showing you that we are able to perform, we are willing to perform, we are capable of delivery, and we are committed to success. We're committed to meeting the demands that you, Joe Public, you, the business community, have demanded of those you have elected and put in office, and those of us, the technocrats, who pretty much put in execution and implementation the legislation that you so demanded of your legislators to put in place. So that's the Public Financial Management Act. How do we manage your finances? How do we give account to those of you who would have elected to put us in place, and those of us who would have engaged in the government service as civil servants, being committed to provide the best of quality of service and customer service to you, Joe Public?
Thank you. And I just want to follow up on that one more time, because, and maybe we throw back in the same order as well. Isn't this going to require not just sort of a change in policies and procedures, but a mindset shift? Because the idea of approaching budget planning and budget and expenditure from a point of view of how are these funds being determined and allocated to actually achieve an outcome and an objective, not just to say we're spending money doing stuff, but we actually have a set of objectives. We create plans that are designed to achieve these objectives, and then we create a budget that will support those plans. Talk about the mindset shift that it seems will also be required to approach public finance management from an outcomes and impact point of view, rather than just a administrative or spending point of view. Ms. Scott,
Noel,
go ahead.
Go ahead. And Noel, that's excellent. And you talk about a culture shift, a mind shift. How do we again gain the trust of the Bahamian public, that what we're doing and how we're doing it is actually acceptable to them? And that's what we try to do. We try to make sure that the public has every confidence in the process and the processes that we implement. And sometime in implementing those processes, the general public will say that they feel that we're a little tough and some of the laws that we put in place is stringent. But I strongly believe that as long as we support and we show to them, for example, ministries now required to do a procurement plan. What is your expected or intended, or forecast is the word that we use in accounting? What is the forecasted budget? We put that forward to you in a budget presentation that is made public during the budget process. And in Parliament, we have the general public will be able to see it. We go down to put it into line items. You can be able to pull the budget and you will see this year, the Bahamas government is going to spend $1 million on, let's say, waste disposal. Let's say better managing that system. So you then would be able to plan that I want to be a part of that process. I realize that they put $1 million out. I am going to, as a vendor, be able to put myself in a position to be able to provide that service. So not only do we hope to give you an advanced look at what the government is doing and how we help to provide those, expect to provide those services to you so you can make better decisions, but also for our agencies to be guided along those decisions. So for example, we would have allotted, say, $20,000 to a particular ministry. That ministry is now required to report and to be able to show how they spend that $20,000 based on the line items, line by line, dot by dot, and to be able to give an account to you, the public, for that. Not only that, as I would mention, you, the business community, would now be able to see what procurement activities you might be able to engage in. You can look from those line items and see where your nature of business lies. So that mind shift is showing you that we're going to be responsible. We move for you to keep us accountable, and we want to be able to work hand in hand together to ensure that this works for the good of all. And once we do this, we prepare for our generation today and for our generation tomorrow, and we hold ourselves accountable and have trust in public servants and also in our government. And that's what we seek to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And so we are going to be moving to close. I have one more question I'm going to throw to you, Ms. Roll. Before that, I just want to emphasize to the public that though the Ministry of Finance is leading this public education effort, and obviously the budget and budget management and public finance management sits with the Ministry of Finance, just as a reminder, and during the budget exercise, we like to speak about this as well. every ministry is, and agency is really responsible for executing on the government's plans based on budgeted funds. And so while the management of those funds sits with the Ministry of Finance, and all of these regulations help finance officers and create these new rules, the reality is, to deliver on these outcomes, in order to even create the budget, right? The ministries themselves have to assess what it is that their plans are, where do they need money, what are they spending this on, put together their annual plans, request these budgeted funds, and then once the budget is approved, take ownership of these funds in order to implement and execute, hopefully delivering on positive and successful outcomes. And so it's a real public finance management is not just something that sits in the Ministry of Finance. At the end of the day, it's an entire government approach, and all of government is responsible for really ensuring that the system works and that the government can deliver on its commitments. So the final question for the day, before we wrap up, and after this, we are going to invite Ms. Rutherford Ferguson from the Chamber of Commerce to just wrap up for us for the day, and then I'll let you know what's happening tomorrow. But the final question, Ms. Roll, is that, the public service and civil servants sometimes get a bad rap, right? So speak to, you've been in public service for a while and have accomplished a lot in your tenure, and now you're one of the heads of bringing in these transformations. Speak to us from a point of view of a civil servant about, how committed and what is the feeling of your fellow colleagues about driving this change? Should the public feel confidence in the public officers that are responsible for delivering these changes? And give us just a sense of what it means to be a public officer participating in this work.
Noel, I want to say that public servants take pride in being public servants. We take pride in being able to offer excellent service par excellent. I want to speak to the new pieces of legislation that we now have enacted and the Public Procurement Act that comes into play September 1st. You would find that the agencies, the permanent secretaries, the persons themselves responsible for the various tasks have been reaching out and saying, I need training. What do we do? How do we do it? They're excited about their change. They're looking forward to the positive change, and they believe that a lot of the things that are now going to be enacted is long overdue. So they are welcoming it with open arms. They are saying, we need the resources, we need the training, and we're going to do it. So they have received it with open arms and eager to serve. One thing I can tell you about public service is we take pride in what it is that we do. We take pride in being able to be of service to you. Once you can find a public servant that is knowledgeable and has the resources to work, they are one of the most competent, excited person that you would ever meet. And we encourage you to engage us. We encourage you to applaud our efforts. A lot of times we see, well, I went to the Department of Inland Revenue and I applied for this and it did not happen. Or I went to the Ministry of Finance and that did not happen. But when you see that positive response come through, man, everybody is copying that and sending it to each other via their telephone. We see the comments also to encourage us to do better. And we love constructive criticism. But when we do get those good praise and support, we are sending it to everyone saying, look who would have said this and look what they would have said about us. And then we are encouraged. So like yourselves, we like a little pat on the back every now and then, and we desire to make you happy. That's why we're here to serve.
Well, thank you so much for that, Ms. Roll. Jasmine Ajib, thank you very much for your presentation and for both of you facilitating all of those answers to the many questions about the Public Finance Management Act of 2021. So today's sessions and our presentations have come to a close. We thank you for participating with us and tuning in to the conversation. We hope you found the presentations informative and the discussion very fruitful. Just a preview of tomorrow. Tomorrow morning we start at 9 a.m. sharp again, and we will begin tomorrow with a presentation and a welcome from the Minister of State for Finance, the Senator, the Honorable Kwesi Thompson. That will be followed by a presentation on government concessions That includes the employment incentive program that is available to support businesses in hiring new staff during the difficult period of the pandemic, which has put a strain on many businesses. The government has a program that will provide payroll support to you. During the budget, the government would have announced some business incentives as it relates to the southern islands and the family islands. So we are going to have Ms. Mahalia Boodle and Talman Bryce, who are both from the Revenue Department of the Ministry of Finance, speak about the concessions that are available to businesses. And then we will finish the day with 3 trainings. The training seminars tomorrow are really, as I mentioned earlier, on some of the software applications used by the Ministry of Finance, the Atlas portal, the e-procurement and supplier registry, which we've spoken a lot about, and My Gateway, which is a platform that is really, the Department of Digital Transformation has made some waves in rolling out My Gateway. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 9 o'clock for a full and hopefully fulfilling day 2. So I am going to ask now Ms. Rutherford Ferguson, who is the chairperson of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce, to please just wrap it up for us for the day with any thoughts that you may have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nichols. In wrapping up, I just want to say that accountability, transparency, and improved systems, they have been areas that the business community espouses and desires from its public officials. And everything that we've heard today, we can certainly say that we have heard that there's the framework that is being laid. It's the foundation for improving all of these areas. And having regard for that, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Finance for inviting the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce to participate and bringing all of this very useful and critical information to the business community. Having regard for all of that, I'd just like to say we look forward to tomorrow's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody that tuned in, joined the Zoom, and thank you to all of the presenters. Thank you to the technical team that's been working behind the scenes for the production, and the technical team in the Central Communications Unit at the Ministry of Finance, and everybody who was involved in making day 1 happen. We're going to be ready for you tomorrow morning. Please tune in. Please visit our social media pages if you want to find the link to share with others. We have 4 websites that we want to remind you of so that you are able to do any follow-up. The first one is the budget website, bahamasbudget.gov.bs. There's a lot of information on that site, so we encourage you to visit there. The second website is the Access Accelerator Small Business Development Center's website, which is accessaccelerator.org. You can go there and sign up for the programs of the SBDC. The third website is the Department of Inland Revenue's website, inlandrevenue.finance.gov.bs, which is the Department of Inland Revenue's website where businesses go to sign up for a business license, to request a TCC, to sign up as VAT registrants, and to engage with DIR in a whole number of different business and tax matters. And finally, the e-procurement and suppliers registry website, which is suppliers.gov.bs. And we encourage all businesses to go there to sign up as a supplier so that you will be able to see all of the opportunities that are going to be available through the government procurement process. That's suppliers.gov.bs. Thank you so much for participating today. I wish you a great afternoon and look forward to seeing you tomorrow bright and early at 9 a.m.